Hey class, welcome to lesson number 43. As usual, we have a tradition here. We'd like to go over the first homework question that we gave you guys in the last class. In the last class, the question was the following. Please give me the monetary tools that are used either in an inflationary economy, to my left, or a recessionary economy, which is to my right. So let's start off with the recession, right? We were in a recession. Still feels like we're in a recession, but we are technically out of a recession. But 2008 marked a pretty significant time in economic history for all of us, and I'm sure wherever you are in the world, all of you do know that the world's markets did not do so great, and we went to what we call a recession. And in order to fight recession, we have three particular monetary tools that we could use. The Federal Reserve, which is the authority in the United States that gets to control the monetary policy, can do the following. They can buy bonds, and we talked about open market operations. Open market operations basically means that the Federal Reserve engages in an operation, open market operation, where they sell and buy bonds. In a recession, when they buy bonds, what happens is that they inject money, and when they increase money supply, we've gone through that flow chart, but it basically increases aggregate demand at the end, and that's what we wanted. And so buying bonds basically gets us out of a recession using monetary tools. So second one we talked about is lower the discount rate. Now, if you lower the discount rate, again, the same theory is that when they lower the discount rate, it's cheaper for banks to borrow money from the federal government. And what that does is that it basically injects more money into the money supply. Okay. So we want to, one, buy bonds, increase money supply. Two, increase money supply. I'm sure all of you are on a trend. The basic idea is to increase the money supply here, right? And we made that jump in the last class, okay? We talked about a couple different things, and I can quickly review how that works. But in general, the idea was the following. We said that if the money supply goes up, right? If the money supply goes up, let me create some space for myself here. But if the money supply goes up, the idea was that the interest rates would go down. Why? Because if the money supply increases, we said that, well, money becomes cheaper. If there's something more of any product, right, in our case it's money, right, things become cheaper. And the way we talk about price of money is nominal interest rates. So if nominal interest rates decrease, what tends to happen is, sorry about my arrow there, but what tends to happen, it's the right arrow, and what tends to happen is that your investments go up. Why are your investments going up? Well, it's cheaper to borrow money, right? So we talked about these firms and people in general think that when, well, the price of borrowing money is cheap, the investments from the firm side go up because all of a sudden their rate of return from their projects, right, is either equal or greater than the interest rate. And that makes sense for them. So it's profitable to invest, okay? So investments go up. All right, cool. Investments go up, and then I goes up. Then we talked about this principle where if your consumption or your investment demanded, right, or investment rather, your government spending or your net exports, if either of them go up, the natural thing to do is that aggregate demand goes up, okay? Aggregate demand goes up. And that's how we relate aggregate demand going up, right? And generally meaning aggregate demand, right, leads to two different things. We said that if aggregate demand goes up, and we used graphs to understand this in the last couple of classes, so hopefully by now everyone understands what's going on. But basic idea is that when aggregate demand goes up, right, your output goes up, and the way we talk about output is your GDP, right, or GDP, or in this case, our GDP, because we talked about the fact that nominal GDP just means that, you know, it's counting for not inflation, and we want to make sure that we're factoring in inflation to our GDP account. So if AD goes up, your our GDP actually goes down, and the direct result of our GDP going up is that actually your employment goes up or your unemployment goes down. Okay? And this is how we fix a recession, right? So we said we use either buy bonds, which increases money supply, because the government injects money that way. They're buying bonds from the banks and they're giving money in return. Lower the discount rate. The discount rate, if you guys remember, is the rate at which the federal government gets to give money to the banks. So the government says, U.S. government says, for a particular interest rate, this discount rate, let's say 3%. For 3%, banks, you can borrow as much money as you want. If they lower the discount rate, it becomes cheaper to invest. Sort of like when investment rates go up, right? We understand that investments go up. In the same way, the federal government, when they lower the discount rate, what happens is that banks say it's cheaper to borrow money, and this again increases money supply, okay? The last thing to do is lower the reserve ratio. Well, remember that when banks, right, when they have a particular amount of money, right? So let's say they have $100. Out of these $100, if they're required to keep about 10%, 10% of $100 is $10, and the rest, which is 90, they can loan out. Okay, so that goes in the funds for the loanable funds market. Now, what if this is 5%, right? 5%. Well, 5% of 100 is $5, and instead of 90, we can actually put in 95 into the market of loanable funds. So that increases money supply. Okay, so all these three tools, they increase money supply, which decreases interest rates because it's cheaper, then that increases investments because if money is cheap to borrow, firms will say, hey, you know what? It's actually valuable for us to go ahead and invest in projects because our internal rate of return is actually good. And so that happens when investments go up. Your aggregate demand goes up because we've talked about that relationship before, right, using graphs. And then when we said when AD goes up, well, our GDP goes up and then unemployment comes down. And that's the recession side. Okay, so let's talk about inflation on to my left, all right? So the exact opposite tools, we talked about this. First thing is that we increase the discount rate. Well, one of the things I want to say is just because I'm saying this is in no particular order of significance. In fact, selling bonds, we talked about the fact that open market operations, OMO, is the most significant way that the government gets to alter the use monetary policy as a tool to correct the economy. So in fact, selling bonds actually might be the most important one. So I just wanted to let you guys know that this is not in a significant order as such, but know that selling of bonds is probably one of the most important things in terms of getting out of an inflationary economy in monetary policy. Okay, so constantly in your head, think about inflationary policy, think about monetary policy versus fiscal policy, okay? Because they're two very different things. And in terms of monetary policy, we've said that selling and buying of bonds is the most important one, all right? So other than that, if you talk about fiscal policy, that's a whole new set of rules that we can apply and a whole new set of tools that we use. So don't get yourself confused with fiscal policy and monetary policy. These that we're talking about today is monetary policy, okay? So increasing discount rate, well, what does that do? When you increase discount rate, right? So that's saying, wait a minute, discount rate is a rate at which the banks get to borrow from the government. If I increase that, money becomes more expensive. So banks all of a sudden are not going to loan as much. And what that's going to do is that it's going to decrease the money supply, okay? It's going to decrease the money supply, okay? So when you decrease the money supply, eventually actually you end up with an aggregate demand that's low, but our final goal is actually to fight inflation, and actually the end product of this is that price levels will be going down. I'll run you through the flow chart right after, but I think we'll just go over these first again, just one more time. Increasing the reserve ratio. This is actually supposed to be reserve ratio, RR. Okay, I just said increasing reserve RR ratio, but it's supposed to be reserve ratio. Reserve ratio, as you remember, guys, is the amount of money that banks get to keep, and the rest of it they get to loan, right? So if you increase your reserve ratio, I went over this a little bit in the recessionary side of it, but when you increase the reserve ratio, what tends to happen is that the amount of money in the money supply goes again down, okay? Again down. Lastly, when you sell bonds, what happens? Well, when you sell bonds, what tends to happen is that the banks, what they do is they have, so let's go back a little bit and let's first talk about how banks get to invest your money, right? Banks invest your money using a lot of tools, just like how you might invest in a mutual fund or in bonds. Banks also invest in bonds as well, right? So the government comes up to the banks and says, hey, you know what? We're going to offer you a very good price for these bonds. We want to buy them, okay? So what that does is that the government will buy bonds, okay? And actually, it's the other way, excuse me. They make a good price for the bonds. We're talking about selling bonds. So the government makes a good offer on the bonds, and banks will say, you know what, we have all this money with us, and if it's a good investment, we're going to go ahead and invest with you guys. So what they do is that banks give money to the government, and what that does is, again, decreases the money supply. So I'm sure all of you know the key difference right now is that the way to fight inflation is by decreasing the money supply, right? And the way to fight a recession is to increase the money supply, okay? So now let's go ahead and fill out this flow chart. We've done this for a recession. Let's talk about it for an inflation. All right, so we've talked about the fact that there are three tools to make money supply go down in terms of monetary policy, right? We've talked about the increasing discount rate, which means the banks get to borrow less because it's more expensive to borrow money. That's one. Two is that increasing reserve ratio. Well, the amount of money that's being loaned out, right, is less because the government's saying that, hey, if you're getting $100, we want you to put more money with you guys and not loan out as much. Again, that's going to decrease money supply. So that's two. So about three is selling bonds. Well, when you sell bonds, what happens is that the banks give money to the government, and the government in return says, you know what, we are going to give you an attractive price for this bond, so here's these bonds for the amount of money we're taking in. Government takes money from the banks and gives them bonds. Again, decreases money supply. So actually, let's finish this formula over here, this flow chart, excuse me. So when you decrease money supply, so all these three things, right, boil down, and they are tools to decrease the money supply. So what happens? When you decrease money supply, we said that anything, if it's money, cameras, phones, cars, anything, the point is that if you decrease something, right, generally speaking, in this basic microeconomic graph where you have a demand and a supply, right, this being demand, the downward sloping, this being supply, when you shift the supply to the left, what tends to happen is the price tends to go up, right? Like any product, right? So the point is that we're using the same basic principle and we're applying it to money. And what the government does is when they decrease this money supply, what will happen is the cost of money goes up, as in your interest rates rise. Okay? Your nominal interest rates rise, right? So, and that's the way we can dictate price of money, which basically is the nominal interest rate. So price of money goes up. What happens next? Price of money goes up, as in your nominal interest rate goes up because your money supply has gone down. Then what happens is all these firms, businesses, McDonald's, you name it, all these corporations that are thinking of different investments, right? They're saying that, hey, wait a minute, in order to put in money into our projects, what we need to do is that we need to borrow money because we're not going to use our own money. We need to borrow money, right? They need their own money for different purposes. And depending on each company, they have different levels of cash. But the point is most projects, they try to borrow money. Okay? And when people borrow money, what will happen is that it really depends on how much these interest rates are changing. Now, if the interest rate's super high, firms are going to say, well, we can't invest as much, right? Because it's expensive to borrow money. So investments go down. Okay? Investments go down. All right, let's finish up this flow chart. Investments go down. I told you guys your consumption, government spending, net exports, and investment, well, they all affect aggregate demand, right? Because aggregate demand, aggregate spending, we've talked about the whole circular flow before. And so we've talked about the fact this affects investment. So when investments go down, right, the automatic thing is that AD goes down. Okay. Well, the aggregate demand goes down. What will happen next is that your RGDP goes down, right? We've talked about the fact on a graph, we've sort of explained to you guys how that works. RGDP goes down, right? RGDP goes down, it's bad news all around because the economy is retracting, so unemployment does go up. However, remember at this part, we've talked about if you want to talk about a short-run aggregate supply, SRAS, we said there's a flat part, growing part, and a vertical part. And oftentimes when you're in inflation, it's vertical part. So this change that you get out of this is not that significant. It's not that significant. So yes, we're losing jobs, but point is the main battle we're trying to battle right now is prices. And as a result of all of this, actually price levels go down, which is fantastic because what has happened is even though there's not that much of a difference in our GDP, because your prices have come down, we gave you guys in the last class examples about bread and how bread is not ridiculously expensive at $40, right? It's more maybe manageable at $4. So if you're making a little bit less money, but goods are drastically cheaper, it makes a huge difference, right? It makes a huge difference, and that's how we fight monetary policy. It's basically, if you can link money supply going down to price levels going down, you're in good shape. And understand that these are the three tools. Selling bonds, increasing reserve ratio, increasing discount rate. Recession, we try to decrease discount rate, decrease reserve ratio, and buy bonds. Okay, so these are the main differences, and that's the homework question from last time. It was kind of in detail, but it really gives a good recap of the entire monetary policy class. So I'm kind of happy with the way that this recap has worked. So make sure you pay attention. If you want, go back to the classes and try to look at it and try to understand it. Okay? All right, so now let's get into the new stuff. Today we're going to start off with talking about a concept called quantity theory of money. And what is this idea? Well, a lot of people think that actually decreasing and increasing money supply doesn't actually affect our GDP. Well, how does this work? Let's talk about quantity theory of money. Quantity theory of money is pretty interesting because some economists have made an equation out of it. And this is how they explain it. They say that the M, which stands for the quantity of money in the economy, times by the velocity, the amount of money that's being, the turnout rate, and I'll define all of these again, is equal to the price of money times the quantity of money. So we'll try to differentiate all of these. But first, let's talk about the fact that no matter what people tell you of, hey, you know, if money supply goes down, price levels come down, money supply goes up, our GDP goes up. Yes, these are basic principles, but understand that there are a lot of complications that come with it. So every economist have their own take, like little different takes on what tends to happen when we change money supply. But let's talk about quantity theory of money. Let's go with start off with the basic equation, okay? So the basic equation says the following. It says that M times V is equal to P times Q, right? M times V is equal. So what are all of these? M is defined as the quantity of money, okay? The quantity of money. Okay, quantity of money. V is defined as the velocity of money. So how fast is money moving? In fact, I think the definition is a little more technical than that, but in the basic premises, understand that velocity of money is basically how fast money is changing hands. And technically speaking, I believe that it's the number of times that each dollar is spent in a year. So I think it might be actually worth it to just write it down. Velocity, okay, velocity is the number of times that, come down here, that a dollar is spent each year. Okay, so it's just a calculation of how fast the money is moving each year. Okay. P times Q. Okay, P times Q is actually a function of technology because actually P times Q boils down to nominal GDP. Okay, the amount of money that goods are selling at times the amount of goods that are in the economy, right, gives you your nominal GDP. So Q is just quantity, okay? Q is just quantity. So don't get yourself confused with M and Q. So M is the quantity of money, right? So Q is the quantity of goods, actually. So quantity, okay, in general. P is the price of goods. So P times Q gives you your nominal GDP. So what people are saying is that let's say that your M is going up. Your money supply is going up. Okay, and your velocity stays constant, okay? Your velocity stays constant. What tends to happen is that if your quantity of goods is constant, if your money supply is going up, well, your price level has to go up. So I'll run through that one more time, okay? It's a little confusing. So understand there are four variables in this equation. There's M, which is the quantity of money, V, which is the velocity of money, which is defined as the number of times that a dollar is spent each year, okay? And then there's P and Q. And the way we define P and Q is the price of goods times the quantity of goods gives us a nominal GDP. So nominal GDP has been broken down on this side into saying P times Q. Okay, P times Q. All right, so the point is that let's say that your money supply has gone up. We've said, okay, we've used all these policies. We've talked about 3 particular tools that increase your increase your money supply. We said that, well, we could buy bonds, right? We could buy bonds. We could lower the discount rate, or we can lower the reserve ratio. Okay, all 3 of them lead to increasing the money supply. Okay, so and at the end of the day, with using that previous homework question that I just talked to you guys about, the end product was, I don't know if you remember, but we said that increasing money supply, right, increasing MS, basically leads us to increasing our GDP. Things are awesome because we're fixing the economy. Well, people who believe in the quantity of theory of money, they say, well, it's not that easy. Because what they're saying is, let's pretend that the velocity of money is constant in this equation. And like you've said, let's agree that buying bonds increases money supply. So, okay, fine. So M goes up, V stays constant. Okay, V stays constant. We've not changed the amount of money that's being made, so money stays constant. But let's talk about, the velocity of money stays constant, but the money supply is going up. But what if the quantity of goods stays the same, right? You're not selling any more goods. You're not selling any less goods temporarily, so this stays constant. So your price levels have to go up, right? Your price levels have to go up. So what they're saying is, even if your RGDP goes up, if your price levels go up, relatively speaking, and this is that concept again, okay, I'm going to write it down, purchasing power. Okay, purchasing power. Purchasing power basically tends to tell you, life is relative in terms of buying goods. It's very relative, right? So say you make $10 and a bagel costs $1. So you make $10, your income, right? Income is $10, right? And food, right? Whatever you want in the morning, whatever you buy, right? Costs $1. Okay? Now imagine, economy is a little better, right? So our GDP has gone up, economy is a little better, and you make $12 now, right? However, because the price levels have gone up, right? The price levels have gone up, it's now $3, okay? It's now $3. So imagine before with $10 you can buy 10 bagels, right? With $3, even though your income has actually gone up, you can only buy 4 bagels. So the amount of food you can actually buy, your purchasing power has actually gone down, right? Even though your RGDP has gone up and you make more money, right? It's gone from 10 to 12. Point is, what quantity theory of money is trying to tell you is that if RGDP goes up, right, when MS goes up, don't be blind in saying, oh, things are automatically better. Because if your price level has gone up drastically, okay, you have to be careful because all of a sudden you're not as rich as you thought you were in the first place. A lot of words there. I'll just try to retract and try to break it down simply. And on a very simple basis, the argument is as follows. Increasing money supply increases price level. Decreasing money supply decreases price level, as long as the velocity of money and the quantity of goods stay constant. Okay? So the point is, why are we arguing about all these things? Why do we need to know about M and P and whatnot? The point is that if we have to battle in a recession, normally we say, hey, let's increase the money supply, because increasing money supply, what it does is that it increases our GDP. Quantity theory of money dictates that, listen, it's not that simple, because if your price level is going up, your relative purchasing power is a very, very, very important term, because that is at the end of the day what dictates you if you can buy 10 bagels or 4 bagels, right? It's not, hey, it's not just simple as if my income goes up, I'm a happy man. What the point is that if my income goes up, great, but how much is my price level going up? Because remember, inflation is something that we don't like, okay? Something that we don't like. So this concept might show up on the test. I've given you guys this because I just want you guys to just understand back of your head that, when you put into place a monetary theory, a monetary policy or a fiscal policy, it's not that simple. When we talked about fiscal policy, we said that, hey, there could be something to do with an exchange rate, that exchange rate dilemma we talked about. For those of you who remember, basically what the point is that increasing your aggregate demand, your goods become more expensive, and at the end of the day, it actually hurts you, okay? It could hurt you, it just depends. So just keep in mind, it's not black and white. There is a shade of gray, and you need to understand how things are, being affected. So if my money supply is going up, keep in mind how my price levels are being acted, because that dictates your purchasing power. Okay? A lot of terms, so I want you guys to understand in the back of your head to think about these things. Okay? So MV equals P times Q. That's quantitative theory of money. Okay? So now let's jump in to a new topic called comparative and absolute advantage. Okay? And I will define this formally in the next class, because first I just want to open up the concept of trade. Okay, the concept of trade. Each country, whether you live in Africa or in the continent of Africa, you can be in Nigeria, or you could be in South America and Brazil. Each country manufactures a lot of different goods. Right, they make a lot of different goods. And depending on the resources that they have and the people, the human capital, they make different goods. Okay, so depending on each country, they can make oil, right? They can, if they have an oil reserves, they can go ahead and dig in that oil. They can make natural gas. They can make diamonds. It just depends on what people have and what kind of natural resources are available. So point is, each country has their own goods that they have. And everyone is good at making something, right? So you being, let's say you're really good at math, okay? Maybe one of your friends is good at English, okay? So both of you have an advantage in each subject, okay? Now, there are people that are good at a lot of things, but most of us are really good at something. And this is something that we need to talk about, because trade is the concept of applying this notion of saying, hey, you know what? I'm good at math and you're good at English, or I'm good at economics and you're good at, I don't know, something else. The point is that each of us have their advantage. So countries just like that, India, China, America, the United States, Canada, everyone has their own little advantage that they have in making goods. And so this concept of comparative advantage and absolute advantage looks at it from a mathematical perspective of saying, okay, well, if the US has a comparative advantage, I'm making this up, okay, this is just an example. If the US has a comparative advantage in making, let us say, software, right? If the US has a comparative advantage in making software, there are a couple things to look at. And one of the things we'll be talking about is opportunity cost, okay? Because the simple notion behind comparative advantage is who has the lower opportunity cost, okay? And we can talk about opportunity cost a little more in the next class in detail. But the point of comparative advantage and absolute advantage is that if we know, okay, if we can tell the US has a comparative advantage in software, and Canada has an advantage in, let's say, creating hotels. Okay, these are just examples that we're making up. But the point is that we can now tell, okay, well, depending on the costs, it's favorable for US and Canada to trade. Okay, you need to do what you're good at as a country, because the thing is that if you're good at something, if the US is good at making software, they have the ability to make cheaper software, right? Or make software at a cheaper rate than Canada. Okay? In Canada, if they're good at making hotels, okay, which is not a great example, but the point is that it could be any good. Okay? If they're great at making milk, okay, point is that Canada should be making milk and US should be trading it, because Canada can make milk at a cheaper rate than the US can. And that's the basic idea of comparative and absolute advantage. Okay? So we'll go over that the formal definitions in the next class, because I don't want to jump in, because it is a quite involving topic. For now, let's try to recap what we've gone over. We talked about the basic tools of monetary policy in pretty much in a lot of detail. We talked about the fact that in a recession, we buy bonds, we lower the discount rate, we lower the reserve ratio. All of these increase the money supply. Increasing money supply leads to decreasing unemployment, right? And a little before that is actually increasing our GDP, and so economy is better by increasing the money supply. That's a step that we've taken. In inflation, we said it's the quite opposite. We want to decrease the money supply. In a recession, we want to increase the money supply. In inflation, we want to decrease the money supply. Decreasing the money supply, well, we said that decreases the price level. So for inflation, we said we could increase the discount rate, we can increase the reserve ratio, or we could sell bonds. The quantity theory of money was discussed in a lot of detail. We said MV equals PQ. The point was that if the money supply goes up, yes, the RGB can go up, but we need to watch out for the price level. And that's what the quantity theory of money talks about. The homework question is going to be about the quantity theory of money. Tell me about the quantity theory of money. So write down the equation. And if the V and Q are constant, velocity and quantity are constant, how does increasing money supply increase price level? Pretty simple, straightforward. I'll see you guys in the next class. Thank you.